Late summer is the time to relax and enjoy the beautiful rewards for all of our hard work in the garden. Welcome to the Wisconsin Gardener. I'm Shelley Ryan, master gardener and gardening enthusiast. Days like this, it's nice to sit and relax and enjoy the brilliant colors of the Wisconsin prairie. But gardeners have itchy fingers. We're always ready to get our hands in the dirt and begin a new project. And late summer is the time to prepare for fall and even for next spring. Whether you're into flowers, lawns, or vegetables, there's a project for you on the Wisconsin Gardener. Have you ever admired a beautiful cutting garden and wondered how you could bring the outdoors into your home? We'll begin in the backyard of professional gardener Tibby Light. We're standing in the backyard garden of Tibby Light, a professional gardener in the Madison area. Tibby's going to show us how to cut and design a simple floral bouquet using some of the flowers from her own small yard here. This is a 7-year-old garden, and it's really nice to see that everything looks happy and healthy when you consider all the rain we've been having. My first question, how do you define a cutting garden?
Well, a cutting garden, Shelley, is a garden that is planted so that people can cut flowers and bring them inside. But today, what we're going to do is show you that you can make a beautiful bouquet from your garden, whatever it is.
So anybody can do this?
Anybody can make a bouquet.
Is there a good or bad time of day to cut flowers?
Morning's one of the best because the plants are turgid, which means they're strong and full of water from the night before.
Okay. Well, what are you going to start out with? It looks
Well,
like
we're
it's
going
right
to
here.
start out with a bouquet of coreopsis. The reason for this is because I happen to have a lot of these right now.
So a good reason to cut.
Right. Now, the next thing I'd like to do is move on to these yarrow.
Okay. Cut a couple of
Why don't you cut
these?
me a couple of those? And I'd like to add those because, again, I have a lot of them. And also, the color is a light yellow. It's a different texture and a slightly different color.
A little bit more contrast.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of contrast, what about something like these globe thistles?
That's an excellent choice. Why don't we cut 2 of those to add to this?
Try to be careful. These are a thistle.
They definitely are thistle. Now, what these do is they add a lovely colored contrast for us. And they also add a nice textural contrast.
They're really beautiful.
Yeah.
All right. What next in the design?
Well, now we're at a point now where we could start adding foliage. And right here we have several different types of foliage, all of which would be nice in here.
Something like the coral bells.
Exactly. Why don't you cut 2 of those? Now we want to cut fairly
Look
long
at the back side
stems.
of the leaf even. That's beautiful.
Yeah, isn't that nice? All that red.
Okay. Let's see, that one looks good.
Thank you.
And I see Artemisia behind here, and that looks like it would also add nice contrast. Good idea.
The silver would be beautiful with this blue and yellow here.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Now a question. This is a daylily next to me, but it actually almost looks like a grass because it's no longer blooming. Would you use something like this in a bouquet?
That would be a beautiful addition. The texture that it would add would be lovely. The color is lovely. At this point, we don't have that much green in here.
So cut a few pieces?
Yes, please.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Exactly.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. Now.
Oh, now I see a daylily right here that still is blooming. Could we use something like that?
Let's do that. That's a lovely daylily, and it'll add a lovely focal point for us.
So just one then?
Mm-hmm. Let's use one, and we'll put it right in the center.
Now see, that's starting to take shape nicely.
Yes, it certainly is.
What else back here? Is there
Well,
something
you know,
right here?
Here's a black-eyed Susan that hasn't even opened yet, but it's so pretty. Let's cut one of those.
So this might bloom once it's in the vase.
Yeah, you never know for sure, but there's a good chance that that one will.
Okay, I'm going to cut right here so that I'm leaving this bud to bloom later.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Well, now I see us moving into the woodland area, the more shade area, and you wouldn't think there's things in here. I see things I recognize, like wild ginger, and I see a lot of hostas. Normally, I wouldn't think there'd be things in here for a bouquet, but you've said a bouquet of foliage is very important.
Yes.
How much do you use in a bouquet?
Well, actually, some of my bouquets are a half to 2/3 foliage, Shelley.
That much?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
amazing what you can do with foliage.
Well, I'm looking at a hosta leaf right here, and the yellow edging looks to me like it would go with the bouquet. Is that a good
It would be
idea?
beautiful. It's an excellent idea, and that's exactly the way to think. Is just look at something and think, huh.
Contrast or complementing.
Yep, exactly. Let's
2 of
take
these?
another one of those.
See if I can find one without slug damage, but considering the wet weather.
Good luck.
Okay, now I also see this. This is a purple leaf sand cherry. Would you use something that contrasty in such a bouquet?
That's exactly what to use.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that'll
Okay.
add just that little extra bit of spice.
Let me see if I
And
can...
it's nice to think about shrubs. Most people don't think that that can be part of a bouquet for them.
No, I normally wouldn't.
Yeah. And then I just kind of fiddle and fuss and tuck those in. And you know, you try it one way and see if you like it, then you try it another way. And I'd say we've got quite a nice little bouquet there for you, Shelley.
Oh, beautiful. Well, thank you. And look at all the variety that's in that,
And
too.
there we have our focal point. We have contrasting colors. We have foliage. We have accents. Now, you know, last night we cut another bouquet to show you how you can go around the garden and add all kinds of things. This one has over 30 different types of plants in it right now.
Now, I see things that look like they came from the herb garden.
Right, there's marjoram and mint from the herb garden. There's asparagus and garlic from the vegetable garden. There's the cat
Hi,
from
Kitty.
the house.
Well, and this looks like an ornamental onion.
That's an onion from the vegetable garden. I've got clematis from the trellis, and we've got arborvitae from the shrub row.
So anything can be used.
Right.
People shouldn't be afraid to try.
Be as creative as you can possibly be.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tibby. Next, we're going to go to another garden and show you how you can use these same flowers in a different situation. This is yarrow. You just saw it used in the fresh floral bouquet. Now we're going to show you how to use it as a dried flower. We're at Allen Centennial Garden on the UW-Madison campus. And with me is Dr. Dennis Stimmert, Professor of Ornamental Horticulture for the UW-Madison. Dennis, Tibby and I talked about the importance of cutting flowers early in the morning for a fresh bouquet. Is that important for dried flowers as well?
No, the most important thing to consider here is the stage of development of the flowers. When you cut them, for example, the flower that you have here, the yarrow, the heads on here are just opening up and they're displaying a nice uniform coloration.
Beautiful.
In contrast to this set of heads here, which are browning. This is way beyond the point at which they should be cut for drying and are presently setting seed.
Okay, so this is the one we want to go for.
Yes.
All right. And what about the plant right in front of it here? This is gorgeous. Would this work as a dried flower?
Yes, it can be used as a dried flower. This is liatris, and this particular plant should be cut when the upper inch to inch and a half of the spike has the florets open, in contrast to this spike here, which is all done flowering up in this portion and just blooming down here.
So this is also setting seed and it just wouldn't dry well at all?
No, there's not much to display once it's been dried.
Okay, well let's cut a couple of these for our bouquet. Okay, now these seem to have a lot of leaves on them. Would we leave them?
Well, generally when you are drying stems for use in bouquets, the lower foliage should be stripped off, and a person would go in and take off the lower 5 to 6 inches of the stem.
Okay.
That takes away a lot of excess moisture that slows down the drying process.
All right. Well, I cut these with long stems because I'm going to use them in a bouquet. Are there other things that I would use dried flowers for?
They're commonly used in wreaths and also in potpourris.
Oh, okay. Well, in fact, the one in front of us is Artemisia, and the wonderful silvery foliage would be beautiful. Now, is this, in this case, I could use it as it is, or would I use it for something else as well?
Well, it can be used as a filler in bouquets, or it will make a nice background on a wreath.
Oh, so I'd use it as the base of the wreath.
Yes, and the way it should be handled is it should be cut and then allowed to dry for 1 or 2 days where some of the moisture is lost, and then you come back and then shape it into the wreath and then continue on with the drying process.
So I wouldn't let it dry completely. I'd wait and I'd turn it while it's still flexible into a wreath.
Right, and then let it go through the drying to completeness.
Okay, well let's hang some of these on the drying rack. You don't need a drying rack, but it just makes it kind of handy. While I'm doing this, tell me some of the points that I need to remember in order to successfully dry flowers at home.
Well, some of the other factors that are very important in drying flowers successfully is you need to consider moisture, temperature, and light.
Okay.
For example, here is the yarrow that we were just talking about, and this particular specimen was dried in complete darkness, and you can see that the yellow coloration has been retained once it's been completely dried.
It's still quite vivid.
It's very attractive. In contrast to this yarrow, which was dried in full light, the color has faded completely.
Wow. Now, in fact, this was a burgundy yarrow, and you can see it was almost the same color as these roses. The roses were dried in a dark garage. These were dried in a light room, and look at the difference.
That's commonly a problem in drying flowers.
Okay. Would that be a problem with these delphinium as well?
Yes, delphinium makes a very nice dried specimen, but it has to be handled properly. It needs to be dried in complete darkness at temperatures of about 110 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit at a fairly low relative humidity.
So a good place would be my garage, my attic?
Or an attic in a house.
Okay, so not a damp, wet basement?
No, stay out of basements.
Okay.
It's the worst place to go.
All right, what about the peonies?
Peony makes an excellent dried material. Certain cultivars hold their colors very nicely. These should be dried again in darkness under
Okay.
low relative humidity at temperatures at about 120 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay.
Now, something you should notice here, this particular bud was harvested just as it began to show color.
So it's still
this
a bud.
spring. Yes, it's
Okay.
very much in still the bud stage, whereas this one over here was harvested a little bit later on, and you can see the pigmentation is much less in this one in contrast to this one.
So it gets paler as it opens up more.
Right.
Okay. Well, this feels very brittle too. Is that a good indication that it's dry? It certainly feels dry.
Well, that's one way of telling when your plant materials are dry, and this does pose another problem in storing and handling this material after it's been dried.
So be gentle and don't crowd things.
Absolutely.
Well, you also don't want to crowd things because you do want good air circulation.
Yes, on a drying rack like you have here, the air needs to permeate through the whole drying rack and get the moisture away from the plant materials as quickly as possible to bypass disease problems.
Okay. Well, let's look at a couple very easy, common plants that you can dry. This is a hydrangea, and you would pick it to dry when the petals are in this green color. And again, it gets very brittle when it dries, so you have to be careful in storing it. But that's really quite nice for a bouquet. And then this is a straw flower. Now, what's different about this one?
Well, with a straw flower, when that dries, the stem does not offer much support for the dried flower head. And
Okay.
normally what a person would do then is come back in and take the dried flower head and insert a wire, and then it can be used for various things.
So if I'm going to use these in a bouquet, in other words, I want them to stand upright, I'm going to have the
You
wires.
need to insert the wire.
Okay, for a wreath, though, I only need the flowers.
That's right.
Okay, good. All right, and this one. This is pretty.
This is a very nice plant material. This is Pearly Everlasting. It's a plant material that's native to northern Wisconsin and makes an excellent dried material. What you should notice here is that the flowers in this area have been harvested at the correct biological stage of development, and they have not opened up completely once they're dried.
Okay.
Whereas in contrast to the flower heads here,
Oh, yeah.
they're displaying the center of the flower and they're starting to shatter and fall apart.
So, in fact, they look like they're already forming little seeds in there.
Yes, they are.
Whereas these are more of a tight bud.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the important things to remember are darkness, heat, and low humidity.
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We showed you how you can bring some beauty indoors for the winter by using dried flowers. Stay with us and we're going to show you how you can keep your lawn beautiful. August 15th to September 15th is the best time of the year to seed your lawn, and we're going to show you how in this segment. We're at the O.J. Knorr Turfgrass Facility in Dane County. With me is Dr. Frank Rossi, Extension Turfgrass Specialist for the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Frank, why August, September?
Well, Shelley, the best reason for August and September is the grasses don't have to compete with the weeds. It's a lot easier for the grasses to get water and nutrients when they don't have to compete with other plants to get them. Also, the soil's nice and warm, and we should have plenty of moisture available at this time of year.
So it's happy and healthy.
Much happier.
Okay, well, it looks like you've already done some things to the soil here before we seed. What should we be doing ahead of time?
Well, on this site, we've already removed the existing vegetation with a non-selective herbicide, and we've come in and we've tilled to break up the clods.
Okay.
Now, we're going to go back. We've taken a soil test to determine the nutritional value of the soil, and what we'll do is we'll apply fertilizer to make sure we've got a good nutritional balance there so the grass has all the food it needs to get started.
Okay, if you've never had your soil tested, they send back very explicit instructions, how much and what to put down to improve your soil. So we've done that, and now it looks like we're raking.
Yeah, Chris is doing a rough grade there just to get out the bigger chunks, the rocks and things like that, and also to get a nice smooth surface so that we improve surface drainage and we don't have any standing water. Grass
Okay.
doesn't like growing in standing water.
Okay. How do we know what kind of seed to buy when we go to the garden center?
That's a good question, often overlooked by the homeowner simply because they don't really think about those things before they get started. So it's important to know what you're going to use the site for.
You mean
Are
like
you going to play a
athletics?
Little League game
Okay.
on it? Are you going to chip and putt on it? Or are you just going to look at it? And also, what's your site like? Is it sunny for more than six hours a day? That's a sunny site.
Okay.
Less than 6 hours would be a shady site. Is it poorly drained or well drained to determine the kind of seed that you need to put down?
All right, well, we've done that, and you've picked the seed, and now I assume we're going to spread it in one of these spreaders?
Yes, this is a rotary spreader that has about a 10-12 foot swath, and the commercial person would use this, or the homeowner could use it if they have a very large area like what we
For
have
bigger
here.
spaces.
Right,
All
this
right.
spreads it out pretty good, but for the homeowner with a small area, we recommend the drop spreader. Now, with any spreader, it's important to know how much material you're putting down.
Okay.
Because I'll give you a recommendation in pounds per 1,000 square foot. So you'll come down and you'll pick a medium setting here on the gauge that comes on the drop spreader. And then you'll set a little path here. This is a 20-foot path. Our spreader is 2 foot wide, so that's a 40 square foot area. So now what you have to do is collect what comes out of there, either by taping a plastic bag on or just running over a paved surface and then sweeping it up. Yeah, and collecting it. And then you know what you put on per 40 square feet, calculate up to per 1,000 square feet, and you know how much material you're putting down.
So we may either open it or close it to let more or less of the seed out.
That's correct. Now what Henry will demonstrate here, what I'll tell you is that we'll calibrate this time to put down half the recommended rate. So if I gave you a recommendation of 2 pounds per 1,000, we'd calibrate that to put down 1 pound per 1,000.
Why is that?
We'll go in 2 directions, Shell. We want to cover the area twice because it gets difficult for the homeowner to have to overlap on these wheels.
Okay.
So Henry will go first north and south and then east and west to cover the area twice and give the recommended rate in two passes over.
That way you don't end up with any large patches in your lawn.
Yeah, you don't want any large patches, but if you do have patches...
I was just going to ask you, that's my problem. Can I do this by hand or
yes,
do I need to rent?
And what I'd rather that you did, instead of the homeowner just throwing the seed out there and let it blow everywhere,
right,
or just throw and sit on the surface, we'll take a shovelful of soil and we'll throw a handful of seed in, and then we'll mix up that soil and seed, and we'll throw it down, we'll step on it to get good seed-soil contact, and then you're all set for your patches.
Okay, so we're done. We've seeded the lawn, right?
No, almost. What we want to do, and the critical thing, is to get good seed-soil contact so the seed can extract moisture from that soil. The first thing you want to do is mix that seed off the surface into the top 1/8 inch, and that's what Chris is doing here with a light leaf raker.
Okay. You know, I have to ask you, by the way, you've used the term turf a couple times. Can you define that?
Yeah, we, in our little turf world here, we use turf for grasses that are used for a function. For example, lawn turf, athletic turf, golf turf, sports turf. And we use that like forage grass when the grass is being used for a function.
All right. All right. Well, we've raked our turf. Is there anything else we do to it?
Well, what Henry will do here now is he'll get the roller out. And again, this is just to ensure that the seed is in good contact with the soil.
All right. I look at that and it looks like a huge piece of equipment, and I think, I don't want to rent that. I don't want to bother. Is it important to use a roller?
Well, Shelley, in my experience in extension, it's the #1 reason lawns fail is because the seed is not in good contact with the soil. So a little light rolling goes a long way to ensuring success.
All right. So for my successful backyard, I've raked, I've rolled.
Okay.
Do I mulch?
Now, if you have a sloped area and you're worried about the soil moving off or eroding, then you'll want to put some mulch down.
Right.
If you're not going to be able to keep the surface moist all the time, to insulate the soil, we recommend a light layer of mulching, making sure it's weed-free mulch that is not putting weeds in there.
All right, so a flat area like this wouldn't need a mulch?
Not necessarily.
How much do we water our new seeds?
You want to keep that seed bed moist at all times until it's germinated and up. Okay, so it could mean once a day if it's a moist day, or like a windy day like this, you'll want to water a few times to keep that surface moist. Now, once the grass is up, germinated, then you'll keep the root zone moist to about 2 inches. So the surface can dry out a little bit because the roots are down now. So maybe a couple times a week.
All right. Will we be mowing this year?
Oh, this year we'll want to mow as soon as the seedlings get to the height we want to keep it at. Most homeowners should keep their lawn between 2.5 and 3 inches. And you'll want to mow it as soon as it reaches that height with a nice sharp blade so that you're not tearing the seedlings out of the soil.
All right. Is there anything else? Do we fertilize yet?
Yes, you'll want to follow up with a fertilization. We put down 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 to start out with.
Right.
And about 3 weeks to a month after we're established, we'll come back and use half that rate, or half a pound of nitrogen per 1,000.
And that's three weeks after we've actually seeded?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Shel.
Stay with us and we're going to show you some tips on taking care of your established lawn. We're at the O.J. Knorr Turfgrass facility and we're kneeling on one of the demonstration plots. Frank, what am I looking at here? What's the difference?
Well, Shel, you're looking at a Kentucky bluegrass lawn here that's mowed at 1.5 inches or 3 inches.
Which one do you prefer for the average yard?
I prefer the 3-inch height cut, Shel, because you're getting more leaf tissue that cools the surface and helps with weeds like crabgrass. And also, the more leaf tissue you have, the deeper the roots grow.
Well, and it feels nicer to the touch and probably nicer to walk on. The only problem is I really don't care for mowing. I'm looking forward to ending for the fall season soon. When can I stop mowing?
Well, I wish I could give you an exact answer. I know all those homeowners out there in TV land want an exact answer. Unfortunately, unfortunately, it's very much dependent on environmental conditions. And you will notice, though, when the grass slows its growth down, it might be when the average temperature during the day is about 50 degrees. And at that time is when you should take that energy that you put into mowing and think about putting some fertilizer down.
Okay, well, let's talk about the fertilizer. What's important?
Well, the most important thing to think about for fall fertilization is to get that nitrogen on it. In this case, we're looking at a fertilizer that has 25% nitrogen in the bag. That's what the 25 denotes there. Now, the nitrogen serves two purposes. One is it helps in the fall get nitrogen and food to the roots so they can keep growing until the soil freezes, and also helps the plant overwinter and store food for the wintertime.
So when it comes up in the spring, it's healthier, happier, and probably greener.
Maybe.
Okay. What about the other two numbers on the bag? Are they crucial?
They're important. We're looking here at 3% phosphorus and 10% potassium. And what we're looking at in this fertilizer and what we want in most fertilizers is we want the potassium amount to be about half the nitrogen amount. Now, we'll only recommend putting those down based on the soil test.
So follow the instructions you get back from your soil test.
That's correct.
Do we use a drop spreader for this?
Yes, we'll use a drop spreader in this case, and what we'll do is we'll calibrate the same way we did for the seeding exercise, and I'll ask you to calibrate at half the recommended rate I give you, and then we'll go over in the grid pattern.
So we'll be overlapping so we don't end up with any strips down our lawn. I see a lot of bags of fertilizer that are a combination. They're mixed in. It's a weed and feed product.
Right.
Do you recommend them?
I don't recommend them, and it's a really easy thing to demonstrate in the fall because you'll want to do weed control much earlier when you're still mowing than you'll want to fertilize. So you'll want to do your weed control in the month of September. And also, I wouldn't use a granular product for weed control. I would recommend a spray or a liquid product because you get better coverage of the leaf tissue that's there.
Okay, to sum up then, I mow in the fall, I do my weeding while I'm still mowing, and then when I'm done mowing for the season, that is the best time of the year to do my fertilizer.
The best time.
And then I'm done for the season.
And then you're done for the season.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Stay with us. We're going to look at some of the bugs that have been causing problems during this wet summer. You're looking at a normal, healthy aster. And this is one that's been infected with aster yellows. We're at one of the research plots for the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and with me is Professor Chuck Koval, entomologist for the University of Wisconsin Extension. Chuck, tell me about aster yellows.
Well, aster yellows is actually it's a disease organism that's transmitted by insects. In this case, the aster leafhopper. In this case, the insect is a migrant. It comes in from the south every year from the Gulf states, coming up the Mississippi River Valley. So typically we'll see more aster yellows in, say, the western half of Wisconsin, and because it funnels out to the northwestern corner of the state, gets it almost every single year. Aster yellows infect some 150 species of plants, and here we see a late infection, and here is an early infection. So when we get an early infection, we expect a lot of the plants to actually die off. In our planting here of asters, in the next couple of weeks, virtually all of them will be dead.
Well, what other plants are affected by this?
Well, I indicated 150 other plant species, and the home garden is one of the areas that gets caught. And the one we might mention would be the carrots. Carrots that have yellowing, orange, or red-orange foliage starting off about this time of the year are probably infected with aster yellows.
So those aren't normal fall colors.
They're not normal fall colors, and if you pull the carrot out, you'll see some rows of extra roots on it, so a little more soil. And if you taste the carrot, it'll usually be a little bitter.
All right. Well, what about this marigold in front of us?
Well, the marigold in front of us, and I've selected marigolds because they're supposedly resistant to so many things, so we'll dispel that myth. The other one that we see is this is the normal cultivar coloration here. This orange flower is normal. On the same plant, we have a yellow flower, and it's not normal. You can see the deformity that's going on. So the infection is starting to impact that flower after it had opened, and a little bit earlier on, we'll see that these areas are elongated, they're getting pale in color, and as the disease progresses, the plant will get to this type of condition, where we find ultimate death of the plant.
Is there a solution to this?
The solution is difficult. For those plants that are in particular susceptible, like asters, No, there isn't a real solution. But in other plants, such as carrots that we mentioned and marigolds, using insecticidal soaps periodically will help reduce the intensity somewhat.
All right. What about insect damage to trees?
Well, on trees this year, galls have been one of the #1 causes, and we're looking at a gall formation here on green ash. This is the seed pods, and they should all be much like we see here, but instead we have these nut-like clusters that are caused by very minute mites. They begin the infection as growth is starting or the flower is opening in the spring of the year.
All right.
Now we can look at another plant species, in this case silver maple, and we see erinium gall. This too is caused by a mite. Here the brown, it can turn black or green or bright red, such as we see in this case. And if we turn this leaf over and take a look at another section, we'll see another form of gall. Notice the wart-like rows. Sometimes these will be just side by side by side on the leaf. These are caused by a mite as well and known as bladder galls on silver maple.
So we can have more than one gall on a tree.
We can have more than one on a tree, and as a matter of fact, the oak family has some 750 known kinds of galls on it alone.
Do they damage the trees?
Well, they look grotesque.
Yes.
We've never been able to demonstrate that they actually cause damage to plant health. So mainly it's cosmetic if we're concerned about doing something.
So we don't control this?
Usually I don't suggest any controls, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Chuck. With the end of summer comes cooler temperatures, and that means fewer insects. It's a good time to plant a fall vegetable garden because there's less damage. That's our next project. August doesn't necessarily constitute the end of the growing or planting season in Wisconsin. There are a number of plants and seeds that you can plant right now for a late summer, early fall harvest. We're in a small garden in rural Dane County. This is one of the vegetable gardens I work in. And with me is Jim Schrader, Dane County Extension horticulturist. And Jim, we're looking at this cabbage, which is a different shaped cabbage. It's called Early Jersey Wakefield. It's an old-fashioned variety, and when it's mature, the heads are cone-shaped. Now you're going to show us how we can take one of these mature heads and harvest it and still get another crop.
Right. Cabbage is a good example of how we can extend the harvest season. Here's a nice firm mature head, and rather than just breaking it off as we often do with cabbage, if you leave the bottom 3 or 4 leaves and you go just above those leaves and cut the head of cabbage out of there and leave those leaves, remove the main head of cabbage, and when you come back here in about a week or so, you're going to see some small heads starting to form. And usually you can get 3 or 4 small heads coming in there, and they're going to be just nice little firm heads in a few weeks, and not as large as the
Right.
original head, but nice, tender, very delicious little heads of cabbage.
Well, in fact, the same thing happens with broccoli. This is a stem that we cut off the major head of, and now we've got the baby stems coming up for a second crop.
Right, and those little stems will continue to come throughout the summer as you remove the young ones, so you really extend the season by this practice.
Well, and I know it's also good in the late season because as the frosts come, these are fairly frost hardy, but the bugs aren't.
Yeah, bugs are always a problem, especially if you're raising cabbage plants, and whether it's leaf hoppers or whatever, but the big one on cabbage is the cabbage worm.
Right,
and,
as you can see.
get the cool weather or even the first light frost, you at least have less of the insect problems.
Okay, what else can we plant this time of year?
Well, lettuce certainly is one of the popular ones. It only takes about 42 to 45 days to mature. So we have quite a selection of lettuce that are possibilities for us, but we tend to emphasize the leaf lettuces rather than the head lettuces. They would be a little bit longer season.
Well, and this is a romaine red variety called Rouge d'Hiver.
And as beautiful as it is, we see a little problem forming here.
Yes.
This is starting a seed stalk coming up, and this is a problem on lettuce or spinach or radishes. If the weather is too hot and the days are too long, they'll send up a seed stalk, and that's usually the end of the harvest season. They're not as tasty, and they're often bitter. Spinach should do the same things. Radishes won't form well if they start sending up a seed stalk. So select varieties that you've been successful with before, and don't start your fall crop too early. Now as moving into the latter part of August is a very good time. The days are shorter, and hopefully we don't get any real hot days anymore.
and you won't get that bitter flavor that that does have right now.
Right, it does spoil the harvest.
Okay, here I've planted some ornamental cabbages. Now, I plant them in the vegetable garden. A lot of people put them in their flower beds.
Right, and you really can't appreciate the colors that they're going to get, but as the cooler temperature comes in the fall, they will start to color up, and they're very, very attractive in the gardens, and either the ornamental cabbage or the ornamental kale, and also very good to eat.
Oh, they're excellent. I use them in soups because you end up with this beautiful, flavorful soup, and the colors are gorgeous.
Right.
We should mention that the flavors also get better after the frost. And this is ragged jack kale. It's another type of kale, and it's already turning some of the beautiful colors you can see.
Right,
and
start to see the reds in the stem.
This is very hardy. We should mention that this, in fact, I've had some of this over winter in Wisconsin, so this is a good
that's
plant
great.
to be doing right now. Here we've got one of the lettuces that is holding up very well in the hot weather. This is
just
black-seeded
beautiful
Simpson.
leaves.
Very nice, and nice flavor too. Okay, you're going to show us how to plant one of these now.
Right. Whether it's lettuce or some of the other things that can be seeded at this time of the year, if you just take a few seeds, and rather than planting in a row when you have a raised bed like that, I prefer just to put a few seeds between my thumb and fourth finger and just kind of roll them out in between there and spread them out throughout the area that you want to have the lettuce growing. And don't worry about if it's a little bit thicker than maybe you planted in the spring. Often you don't get the germination at this time of the year. A couple of important steps then to follow up with. One is just take a little hand cultivator and work them into the soil a little bit.
That's to get the contact between the seeds and the soil.
You bet. You don't want the seeds just to be laying there on top. And then a final step, which is very, very important.
Even with the wet summer we've been having.
Even with the wet summer, you bet. To water those little seedlings in a little bit, and that will make the seed and soil contact, and that's going to mean that they germinate for you and that you do get a high percentage of germination.
Okay, there's something else we can plant this time of year. Now this you'd plant now for a fall crop next year.
One of your favorites, Shelley.
You bet. This is one of my positive favorites. This is garlic, and this is what it comes up now. It's just ripe now in August, and so I'm going to plant my fall crop for next year. And basically what you do is you take one of the cloves, and here's a single clove of garlic. You put it in the ground, about an inch deep seems to be fine, and then the difference between this and what you just did with the lettuce, I would cover this with a mulch of straw or something like that to protect it over the winter. And it will just grow throughout the winter, and next to spring it'll come up and you'll start to see the crop starting.
Right. I was planting seeds, you were planting a clove.
A clove. And so we can come back in what, about 6 weeks and enjoy salad?
Oh, it's going to be wonderful. The lettuce should be just nice, young and tender and ready to eat at that time.
Great. Thank you, Jim. For those of you that are thinking of planting a fall garden, stay with us. We're going to go up to Brown County and show you how you can protect your plants from early frost. This is a garden cloche. It was used in the 18th and 19th centuries in France as a little miniature glass greenhouse to protect tender seedlings. As you can see, this time of year when the plants get bigger, it has a little bit of a problem. It's a little too small. With me is Paul Hartman, horticulturist for Brown County. And in this segment, we're going to take a look at how you can extend your growing season by protecting your plants. We're in the garden of Master Gardener Bob Cornell, north of Green Bay. And Paul, the first thing we're going to look at here is a plastic covering. Is that right?
Yeah, the plastic covers work well, although you can use other things, whatever you have around the house.
I use sheets a lot.
Bed sheets, bedspreads, other kinds of plastic, anything to go over the top. The basic thing we want to be careful about is to keep the plastic or whatever you're using off the plants.
Okay.
Otherwise, if you have it pressed against them, the frost will come right through there.
So you don't want it to touch the actual leaves.
Right.
Okay.
And this hoop works well for that, although you can use other kinds of different structures underneath.
A wood frame or something like that?
A wood frame would work really well. And what we're trying to do is trap the heat now. We'll take the heat of the soil and it goes up underneath here like this tent-like structure, and then the heat is trapped underneath.
So you want soil or something all the way around to keep it attached to the ground?
Something to seal that all the way around. You don't want the heat leaking out underneath.
Okay, how cold will this protect to?
About 28 degrees.
Okay. Well, and I know one problem with something like that is after the cold night, you have to take it off in the morning if you want rain and the warmth of the day to get back in there.
Right. So another possibility
is something like this. And this is a floating row cover. Now this you can leave on and the rain, the sun, everything gets through just fine.
It works very well that way. Floating row covers are on for maybe 3 or 4 weeks. You want to protect from that first frost.
Right.
And then you can just leave the floating row cover on, and when you harvest, take it off.
Well, in fact, I use them in the spring to protect against bugs, too.
Yeah, that and also a spring extender, it works very well because you can start your plants a lot earlier in the spring.
So you get a jump on it. Okay, let's say I just heard on the radio that the temperature is going to be 30 tonight. So this tomato needs to be covered. What's the first step here?
First step would be to take the mulch off.
Okay.
And the reason we do that is because this mulch will actually keep the heat from coming up from the soil, and it'll keep that tent structure from working well for you.
Okay, so then we trap the heat to the soil by covering it with the floating row.
Right. The next step is then
Okay.
to take a pin, like
tuck this
something
all in.
like this, and just put it right into these
Okay.
sides here, and then you of course want to fasten it down all the way around, again keeping that heat underneath.
Okay. And what other type of plants need this protection? We've looked at zucchinis and tomatoes.
Well, we'd think about peppers as a possibility, melons, of course, pumpkins could even be protected this way.
Okay. All right, well, I just heard on the radio it's going to be a lot colder than 30. They've changed their mind. It's going to be down to 20.
Oh, boy.
This won't work in 20, will it?
No, 20 degrees will kill everything, so it's time to do some harvest.
So, okay. So we take this back off again and put it away for next year. All right, well, with harvesting, obviously, these are ripe.
Those are,
This I can take
excellent
in.
to harvest.
Okay.
And then, of course, the white ones like this you can harvest very easily also. It'll take about a week to ripen them, though.
You take this indoors and ripen it?
Take it indoors. Don't leave it in the garage or the refrigerator. Keep it in temperatures between 60 and 70 degrees. Maybe the kitchen table would be a good place.
So not full sun or a windowsill?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, will that also work for, now look at these. These are much darker green. Will they ripen?
Those will not ripen inside if they're picked off. They'll just stay green and maybe go, they'll rot.
Okay, well, they don't have to rot. If all else fails and it's going to get down to 20, harvest these, turn them red. These pick for recipes using green tomatoes, and there are a lot of recipes that use green tomatoes. I have a recipe right here. Actually, this is green tomato mincemeat. It's a tart.
Wow, that's great.
You can just take a bite of that.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Thanks, Paul. From here, we're going to join Jim Schrader, and we're going to answer some of your most frequently asked gardening questions. And if he's nice, he might get some leftovers. You're looking at the beautiful fall color of a burning bush. Unfortunately, you shouldn't be seeing this fall color in August. With me again is Jim Schrader. And Jim, what's happening to this plant?
Yes, Shelley, you're right. It's too early for the red leaves to be coming on the burning bush. The plant has been too wet and has put the plant under stress. The red color is simply a response to that stress in the plant.
So it's from all the rain we've been having this summer.
Right, another problem associated with the rain.
What do I do about it?
Well, this is just simply an indicator plant, and the problem is too much moisture. So if you could remove the mulch around the plant, this would at least help it to dry out more quickly.
Okay, you said it was an indicator plant. Does this mean I have other plants that are having the same problem and I don't know it?
Well, very likely. Your other plants aren't going to show the early fall coloration, especially the trees and shrubs. So especially if you have mulch around them, it'd be a good idea to remove that mulch at this time.
Okay, well, let's look at some of the other problems caused by this wet summer. These all look very unhappy. What's the problem here?
Right, we're having a lot of foliage problems with many of our plants, and these are 3 good examples. This first one here is rose, and what we're seeing here is what's called black spot. That's the name of the fungus.
Okay.
It starts simply, as the name indicates, a small black spot on the leaf. Yellow halo forms, and very quickly the rest of that turns yellow and the leaf dies.
All right, is that the same thing that I see here on this tomato plant? This looks unhappy.
Well, it's another foliage fungus, but not exactly the same one. The one that we're seeing this summer on tomato is called Septoria leaf spot, and again, it just starts with the individual spots, but with tomatoes this year, very quickly the rest of that foliage is simply, it deteriorates very quickly, and on many tomatoes, that bottom third or bottom of the plant, the foliage is completely gone.
Okay, and we have an apple that looks like it has a similar problem.
Yes, one of the more common problems also. On the apples, you have the brown spots. It's called apple scab, and it can be either on the fruit itself, as we see here, or on the leaves. And many of the flowering crabs, we're seeing it really bad on the leaves, and they're already starting to lose their leaves. Some of the susceptible crab varieties, I would guess probably by the end of August, there's not going to be many leaves left.
Oh. Can we do anything about this?
Well, the answer certainly isn't to be spraying with fungicides. They've gone too far, and that's not going to help. Probably the one thing that will make a difference, and that is if you could get rid of the foliage, the leaves that are underneath the plants.
So the stuff that has fallen to the ground already.
Right, whether it's raking up underneath the flowering crabs or getting there under the tomatoes and getting those stems and leaves out of there, but that's where the fungus actually is going to overwinter if it's left.
So if we get rid of it now, it's also helping for the next growing season.
Right, you'll never get all of that foliage, but get as much of it as you can. You'll at least reduce the problem for next year.
Okay, thanks Tim for the information. With these tips, you can improve your garden for fall and for next spring. Drying flowers, seeding lawns, planting vegetables. We've covered a lot of ground today. Remember that your county extension agent can be very helpful if you have additional questions or need more information about any of the projects we've begun. I'd like to thank all of our experts and specialists for their help in getting us started. Now we have a lot of work ahead of us. I'm off to the vegetable garden. Thanks for joining me on the Wisconsin Gardener.